I thought I would begin my homily this morning with a little quiz. I'm wondering if anyone here can recognize where this place is or what it is. Any guesses? I didn't know myself until 2 weeks ago, but it struck me, and I'll tell you the story of why. And then the next one is, does anyone know who this man is? And again, I didn't know anything about him until 2 weeks ago, but he has so far changed my life. And so I wanted to introduce these two guys, or this gentleman and someone else that you'll know, because it really is a connection for me to what the readings call us to do. And that is keep the things that are distracting to us and the things that get in our way as sinfulness away from God. And we heard pretty striking words in that second reading about what happens if you don't do that, about how we are in big trouble if we don't lose the things that burden us and get us closer to Christ. The first reading, again, said it very clearly. Young Joshua was trying to help out his mentor Moses, and he says, Moses, these guys are not following the law. We need to stop them. What does Moses say? Are you jealous for me? And again, perhaps in your life, I know in mine, there have been times when I've gotten a little bit over my skis, where I've said and done things that were a little righteous, perhaps a little judgmental, and certainly not as Christian as I should be all the time. And I think we're reminded here to say, we're not here to judge, we're here to help love each other. And certainly at Catholic Charities, many of you have been a part of that mission over the years, helping us to help some of the most vulnerable among us. And then again, in that gospel, we're told very directly, if things are getting in your way, then take them away. And anyone that does anything for you in my name, whether they're one of us or not, is one of mine, God's children. And I think sometimes I need to be reminded of that. It's not just the people that are in the pews. Hopefully, all of us here are good to hear Christian, and we're here because we are believing in God and trying to do the right thing, and we make mistakes, and we fall off the horse, we get back on. But it's easy to judge people that are not here. And they're trying to do good things in their life, and as I like to say, is my 12 years at Catholic Charities, you never know what's going on in someone's life. You never know what's behind the curtain. You see them for a few minutes or maybe an hour, and you judge why they are the way they are. And I've learned that's a dangerous thing to do. I like to tell my kids, don't paint portraits with snapshots. And maybe that's something as you parents continue to raise your family. You'll remind yourselves and your kids, it's not about judgment, it's about what we do in thanksgiving for what God gives us, and that you model that for your kids as you model it in your own life. And so again, we're called to say, if these things get in our way, maybe it's money, right? Maybe it's attention. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's ego. Maybe it's alcohol. Maybe it's food. Maybe there are other things in your life that become your priority. And those things the unintended consequence could push you away from God. And I think we're being called today to say, I don't think God really wants us to maim ourselves, but when you think about the context of when these readings were written down, what was the most important thing to people? And I would argue it's still today. Our health. You can't be a carpenter or a fisherman or a shepherd if you don't have the resources physically to do it. And again, in those days, we know that their life expectancy was a lot lower than it is today. So I would argue that they all realized that without our health, we have very little to care for ourselves and our family. So I think that's an example of something that the Lord was saying, look, if no matter what it is, if it's getting in your way, get rid of it, or push it away, or put it in perspective. Maybe that's the best thing to think about. We put money in our bills, in our riches in perspective, and that we remember that we own nothing. We are administrators of what God has given us. And last night we had a baptism at the 4 o'clock Mass, and I was blessed because the young girl that was being baptized is my great niece, and my wife was the godmother. And so I said last night, and I say it again, I said, sometimes I get a little bit anxious about money and bills. And I said, if you wonder if that's the truth, just ask my wife. And so I wanted to continue, we'll get through this 45-minute homily about as quickly as I can, is to talk about how the guy that you saw in the beginning, I think, has lived and modeled what it means to go directly at what Christ wants him to do. And so the next slide that I'll share with you is, again, a way that this community and this city helps us at Catholic Charities. Many of you have volunteered at this meal. You've helped to pay for it. You've donated. We serve 500 plus people a day, almost all families, with little ones just like this, coming in because they have no place else to go. And they get a quality meal and they get hope. And that's the both and that Pope Francis talks about as a Jesuit. It's not the either or, it's the both and. It's the help and it's the hope. It is the dignity and it is the compassion. And many of you have been a part of that over the years. Also the food pantry. This time of year, this time of month, we are slammed. We had 150 families come in on Friday with, again, little kids in tow, because they simply cannot put enough food on the table for themselves, especially at the end of the month. And again, it's not about judgment, because I know most of these, well, I don't know all of them, but I recognize them because they're the working poor. They're working really hard to do the best they can to care for their families, and they're just not making it. And they feel bad about it. And we don't want them to feel bad about it. We want them to know that we care about them. But that's, I think, when we show care and compassion, is when we push away those barriers that sometimes gets in our own way of judging people. And I think that's, again, as parents and godparents and all of us, to remember that we have to plant those seeds in our kids, not by what we say, but what we do, or maybe what we don't do. And then, again, who is this guy? So this guy was introduced to me just a couple weeks ago. He's an American from Oklahoma, born in the 30s, and his name is Stan Rother. And Stan is the oldest of 4 kids, and his family owned a farm. So, big farm. So you could say that Stan probably and his family are a bit more well-off than people that had small farms. And so in the 30s, he's a worker, right? He's out there working the fields, like his siblings and his father and his uncles are doing. He gets a call to become a priest. So he goes to the bishop, he gets in a seminary, and he flunks out of school. He cannot get Latin. He simply can't get it. Well, I can't get Latin either very well. I don't know about you. The bishop finds another seminary to take him, beautifully. And Stan gets ordained as a priest, and this is the message on his ordination card. For myself, I am a Christian. For the sake of others, I am a priest. Beautiful, simple, beautiful. And you can see Stanley, he's a husky young guy. I mean, he's a worker, right? He's a field guy. So he goes, he gets ordained. He's in Oklahoma. He's working in a parish. And then the diocese decides to adopt a community outside of the country that's really poor. And they pick a place in Guatemala. So after a few years, Stanley decides to ask the bishop to go to Guatemala as a missionary. So he does. Now again, this particular community, as I learned in Guatemala, they speak a dialect that is not even written down. So here you got the guy that flunked out of seminary, cannot speak Latin, and he's going to a community that doesn't even write the language down. And by God's grace and the miracle, he learns the language, he begins to catechize and teach and help them build and run their community. He's a farmer, so he teaches them how to farm and how to bring water in. And of course, he gets the attention of the government, because the government's not very happy that this white fella from Oklahoma, this priest, is rousing up their people. And Stanley gets put onto a death list. The bishop finds out about it and calls Stanley home and says, you have to leave. You cannot stay there. Your life is in danger. Stanley comes back, sadly. 5 months later, he says to his bishop, I got to go back. These are my people. And what happens? Stanley goes back for Easter Mass and is executed in his rectory at 1 a.m. And no one was ever held responsible. I think Stanley was in his late 40s. I learned all this because I went to Oklahoma recently for a meeting, and that building that I showed you is a shrine to him. And so the story of Stanley continues. So Stanley is the very first martyr from the United States, and he is the first priest to ever be beatified. And Pope Francis recognized that, and he's now on his path to canonization. And why that's important is it continues to do a testimony to him that ordinary guys and women can do extraordinary things. So I was told this story by the Archbishop because I had a chance to assist at Mass at this beautiful shrine. And I think I've got a few pictures of that next. And so this is the place that I showed you in the beginning. This is in Oklahoma City. With all due respect, I did not expect to find this in Oklahoma City. I used to live in Oklahoma, so I can share that a $50 million shrine on the south side of Oklahoma City just opened a year ago, and it's completely paid for. And it's paid for by a community that has about 11% Catholics. So it was just the rank and file people that learned about Stanley's story. And the beautiful thing about Stanley is the one on the upper right is his entombment. There's a chapel behind the shrine, or on the back part of the shrine. And when he died, the community was just devastated. And they said, we can't let him go. We can't let his body go. He's our priest. And his family graciously allowed them to harvest his heart. And his heart is entombed in Guatemala, and his body is entombed in this shrine. And there's a memo or a record of Stanley and a relic. And so when the Archbishop is telling me these things before Mass, I'm blown away. And so I prayed to Stanley, and the Archbishop said, Tom, pray to Stanley for the hard things. Pray to him for the complicated things in your life. Pray to him for your family, for your children, for your parents, for those people in your life, for yourselves humbly that are struggling. He said, pray to him for the hard things. And I've been doing that every day. And that's, I think, what's changed my life, is to know that somebody like Stanley, regular guy, is making a huge difference in the world. Someone else that you probably remember a little better than Stanley is St. Vincent de Paul. And his feast day was this weekend, and he's the patron saint of charity and the homelessness and the poor. So I thought I'd put this up because we know that this guy changed the world and still is changing the world. He was, as I read, a younger guy, very smart, well-educated, a bit arrogant, because he knew he had it all together, and his life was changed. And look what St. Vincent de Paul's done, what he's created. One man with God's grace. And so I close by saying, take these guys, the hard stuff, and let us please, St. Vincent de Paul, please pray for us. And blessed Stanley Rother, love this picture, this regular guy. Blessed Stanley, please pray for us.